All right, it's 3 o'clock, so we're going to start. I'm a member of the Friends of the Library, and Sandy Oliver, who needs no introduction, has graciously accepted our invitation to make a presentation today on Maine desserts. Most of you know Sandy, so I don't need to tell you very much about her, except that she's a food historian and has been writing columns in various newspapers for an extremely long time. And her cookbook is now available in paperback for $25. She'll take checks or cash made out to her, checks made out to her. And without further ado, I will let Sandy take over this presentation on Maine desserts.
What's a do anyway? Without further ado, I mean, what's a do? I don't know. I don't do. So you like desserts, huh? I like desserts too. I like, even if it's not much of a dessert, sometimes a piece of chocolate at the end of a meal is like the period at the end of a sentence. You know, you don't need a whole other paragraph. Sometimes you need a period. So what I'd like to talk about is I think there are interesting things about dessert, and I hope that I'll convince you of the same. Let's start with a sweet tooth. What is it about Maine and a sweet tooth? We're hardly unique in the nation for having a sweet tooth. Actually, I looked it up today, and there's more sugary snacks consumed in Pennsylvania than in Maine by a long shot. However, Utah is the biggest consumer of Jell-O. Now, what? Yeah, it is. So, and why would that be? Well, let's think a little bit about, pardon?
They can't drink.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, a lot of the foundation of the Maine sweet tooth comes from the Prohibition movement, which got its head start right here in Maine with Neil down in Portland, and moved on to a total prohibition of selling alcohol in the state of Maine back in the 1850s. So, you'll find that a lot of people who don't drink will grab every candy bar they see, have a big dessert, there's something about that sugar that people really like to have, and if you don't drink, you're going to replace it with sugar. So there's still dry counties in Maine, I found even in Massachusetts there's certain little dry towns too. Barbara Telemo, John Cowher come from such a one, in Weston. There was no place to buy liquor in.
Yeah, Rockport used to be dry.
Who?
Rockport, Massachusetts was dry.
You'd think with all those fishermen.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, you'd think with all those fishermen, they could knock a few back. Maybe they're dry because there were a lot of fishermen knocking it back in the early days. When we finally did adopt temperance as an important principle in this country, it followed during the federal period the highest consumption per capita of alcohol in this country. So it really, society was really prepared to put the stopper back in the bottle. And then you saw how well it worked because, we went through our own prohibition period and then it was ended. And anyway, it didn't stop drinking. It didn't stop brewing in bathtubs or any of the rest of that stuff that happened. So, all right, so anyway, that sort of sets the ground, breaks the ground for desserts. Now, one principle I just would like to leave with you is that there is no such thing as a recipe invention. A lot of people will say, oh, well, such and such was invented by. So-and-so was working from a base of knowledge about whatever it is they're making a new wrinkle on. Lots of times an individual can be blamed for popularizing a particular dish or, inventing it. But in fact, all recipes are like human beings. They're descended from some ancestor way in the past. So I want you to just bear that in mind as we're talking about different kinds of desserts in Maine. I want you all to know that a lot of them had forebears, and that they have cousins and siblings. We'll need a sibling. Maybe it's a second cousin. We'll worry about that later. Anyway, so it's all related. Also, I want you to remember that Maine was actually kind of a poor state for most of the 19th century and into the early 20th century. The state simply was never quite as prosperous in those years as the rest of New England, particularly southern New England, the Boston area. So poverty has a wonderful way of preserving. Things don't change. People keep their old kitchens the way they always were. They were not, they didn't rush out and put in the latest bathroom that they possibly could in their house. They didn't buy all the stuff that we just take for granted being able to go off and pick up. What does that have to do with desserts? Well, one of the things I noticed right away when I moved to Maine was the survival of a lot of molasses desserts. Molasses is a cheaper relative of white sugar. It started right within my marriage. When Jamie McMillan came home from school when he was a kid, his mother spread a piece of bread with some butter, dribbled molasses on the top of it, and gave it to him and his brothers as their after-school snack. And I thought, that's interesting. And there were molasses donuts being made at Weaver's Bakery in Belfast. Some of you might remember those molasses donuts. Molasses donuts disappeared from southern New England a long time ago. But here they were in Maine, still being made, and people still, biting. Sharon's smiling. Did you have molasses donuts when you were young?
I love molasses donuts.
Yes, see, they're really good. Right. Okay. And there were other kinds of desserts too that are marked by the need for using molasses instead. For example, one of our famous cakes here in Maine is blueberry cake. I never saw blueberry cake until I came to my father-in-law's funeral. At the house afterwards, there were a couple of blueberry cakes. It was September, and some people brought around blueberry cakes. And I thought, hey, this is cool. I've never seen this before. Well, sure enough, there's a molasses blueberry cake as well. Now, how you can taste the blueberries through the molasses, I don't know, but there you go. There is such a thing. A substitution of molasses for sugar. And it all has to do with slightly harder times. So we have here a list. I might be able to give you some choice if you want to talk about some things more than others. We can emphasize those things. For example, I definitely want to talk with you about cookies for lumberjack seafarers and a cookie named Crybaby, which I think would be kind of fun. Some wrinkles on how to use molasses and other things. Whoopie pies? Anybody interested in whoopie pies?
Yeah.
They're loathsome, but they're interesting.
Thank you.
I have never liked whoopie pies.
Oh, they're terrible. Frosting to cake ratios. Oh, no.
They just don't- yeah,
And it's made with Crisco, so it tastes like gasoline.
I know, isn't that awful?
Oh.
Anyway, let's see, we're gonna definitely talk about hard times because we have here an eggless, milkless, butterless cake, which leaves you wondering, well, what's in there anyway? I'd like to talk a little bit about test kitchen offerings in the 20th century. Food producers had test kitchens, and they started cranking out all kinds of recipes for all kinds of things. And Maine glommed onto a few of those. We can talk about mincemeat. We can talk about needles if you want to.
Yes, all of those.
Is Carolyn in here? Carolyn was asking about Indian pudding.
Yeah, molasses.
Indian pudding.
Indian pudding.
Oh, Indian pudding, sure. Oh, yeah, we can talk about Indian pudding. Now, that's one thing, made with molasses, that survived throughout all of New England, actually, because that was But you might wonder why it's called Indian pudding, wouldn't you? You'd think that maybe the Indians sat in their lodges here and mixed molasses into cornmeal, right?
didn't use molasses.
No. So, all right, let's start with just why is it called Indian pudding. When the English settlers came from England to this country, they brought with them the predilection for something known as a milk pudding. And this was milk with various things mixed in, usually a wheat product when they were in England, and you sweeten it and you bake it for a long time, and it it gets firm-ish. It's still a little jiggly. Well, lacking flour in this country, they turned to cornmeal, maize, which the settlers in those days called Indian, because if you said corn, that was the same thing as saying wheat. The word corn was a generic term for all grain. So the Indians' corn just got shortened to Indian. So you have Indian, there was Indian cakes, there was Indian bread, there was Indian this and that, and Indian pudding. Lots and lots of molasses dumped in there, lots of milk. Actually, relatively little cornmeal to the milk. 7 great spoonfuls of cornmeal and a quart of milk, and molasses to sweeten. You bake it. It's really just a reduced milk pudding. I mean, you just bake it until the milk all evaporates away, or the liquid in the milk does, and you're left with this wonderful thing that looks like. Restaurants don't serve this very often anymore, and I think it's because of what it looks like when you look at it and you see what it looks like. Right, you can put ice cream on that, it still looks like what. So I don't see it in restaurants very much anymore, but that's where it is. And it's, you can buy it canned these days. You can, stores who specialize in Maine products will sometimes have canned Indian pudding. Now, there was an Indian pudding in the South as well, but it was sweetened with white sugar. And it has a similar kind of appearance, but it's not the same color. And I gotta tell you, I like the molasses version a lot better than I've had both kinds, and I really like the molasses one a lot better. So that's the Indian pudding story. Let's talk a little bit about lumberjacks, seafarers, and crybabies. So you can imagine lumberjacks and seafarers work so everlasting hard in really adverse weather conditions, cold, and a lot of them were pretty young, and young guys have 2 hollow legs, and they can eat their cookies by handful. And then the lumber camps and on board fishing vessels as well, the cook cranked out these cookies by the dozens, by the pounds, probably by the ton, lots of times sweetened with molasses. And also, in lieu of butter, they would use bacon fat, which had the additional virtue of providing extra calories for these guys so that they would be, they were ingesting useful calories to cut down another tree. So, lumberjack cookies, I have a recipe for one that'll produce 100 cookies really easily. And I would imagine in your average camp, that would have lasted about half an hour. And they were baked on board fishing vessels at sea as well. So a lot of these folks, once they came ashore or they came home from the woods, kept a taste for these nice molasses cookies. And so, a molasses cookie of that sort has a long, glorious history. Have still dozens of hundreds of cookie jars in Maine. With cookies, and little kids grew up with it as something to go and snatch out of Granny's cookie jar. Now there's a version of these molasses cookies, very similar to the standard lumberjack cookie, that for some reason is called a crybaby. And I think it was probably meant to shut the little ones up. You're having a cookie. So It's very interesting. I first learned about cranberries when I gave a talk down in Yarmouth. And somebody said, "What is a crybaby?" And I said, "It's a little kid going." And then, oddly enough, just like a couple of months ago, I was going through my mother's recipe box. It's a little white enamel thing with a little blue figure on it. You've seen it. There's a recipe for crybabies in it. I was just blown away. I don't ever remember Mom making crybabies. But I'm sure it was meant to comfort some poor kid with a scraped knee. I hope so, because if I was whining and somebody rewarded me with a cookie, I'd keep whining. But that was a hi, come on in. Hi. So that's the story on crybabies. But there's a whole class of molasses cookies. Some are hard, some of them are soft, some of them are kind of pillowy. Others are, big, fat, and round. I mean, there are all kinds of molasses cookies. And as far as I'm concerned, they're all good. And we're going to have crybabies today. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, good. Okay. They're little.
Do we have to whine to get
Yeah.
We're like the fairy, no whining. No whining in the library.
No, but if we run out, I have more. The recipe makes 120%.
Wow.
I think one of the fun things about what happened to molasses is that we now substitute in a lot of our recipes chocolate for molasses. Now, let me tell you what tipped me off about that. I ended up with a cookbook that was kept right here on Islesboro. And back in the early part of the 1900s. And I was thumbing through this, and I found a recipe for marble cake. Now, you know that marble cake swirls together dark and light batters, right? In this particular recipe, the dark batter was molasses-based. And I thought,
Oh, that sounds good.
oh, I know what's going on here, right? No chocolate, but you can still make a molasses. You can still make a marble cake using molasses. I haven't done this myself yet. I will one of these days. It's just that, I can't eat desserts like I used to. I just can't.
I'll come help you.
It's a deal, Sharon. But I was very intrigued to see that. And so I started paying closer attention to all of these potentials for using chocolate in lieu of molasses. And essentially, I think where prosperity allowed it, chocolate has just rolled over molasses in an awful lot of recipes. So we have chocolate instead. Now, I think that chocolate probably, is there anything here I should tell you about? Oh, well, we're going to have what we're going to have is a chocolate cake, which is called hot water chocolate cake. This is an intriguing little cake. I got an inquiry, as some of you know, I wrote for the Bangor Daily News for a long time, and people would send me queries. And I finally got a query from this wonderful woman up in Machias named Ruth Thurston, who sent me this little card in the mail that said double scrub. And it's a recipe for a hot water chocolate cake. Now, why it was called double scrub, I can't possibly provide an answer.
Pans, when you were probably what you had to do with the pans after she tried to get the cake out.
Could be. Anyway, what intrigues me about this is that I grew up with a hot water gingerbread. And these cakes are made virtually the same, except in this chocolate one is an oil base. The shortening is oil. But you add hot water at the end, so it looks like something you should drink, not bake. And so does the gingerbread. Now the hot water gingerbread is Nancy Worry's birthday cake every year, made by Eric. As far as I can tell, you follow the same procedure, and you get the same thing. So it looks to me like a bit of a, a substitution.
Just like a pudding cake?
Nope, it firms right up.
It ends up like a regular cake.
But it's very moist.
And it's a moist cake.
Yeah.
You'll get to eat
It's right
some.
here, and you'll get a piece of it, you'll see how it is. I made this with milk chocolate instead of, I did not a dark chocolate, but you know, there you are. So I think that's another interesting kind of thing. If you're ever poking around in your family's recipe book, kind of pay attention and see if you see any of this kind of interesting stuff bubble up. And tell me about it if you would. I mean, I'm just fascinated to see how these things play out. Now, Maine is famous, of course, for something made out of chocolate, which is those darn whoopie pies. Whoopie pies have a, you know, there's more mythology attached to those darn things. They date to the very early 1900s. And the working theory right now is that the cake part recipe came from somebody baking these little chocolate cakes at the Berwick, Maine train station. And that the recipe was carried away by the Berwick Baking Company in Boston. And one scholar of these things says that he believes that these whoopie pies are sort of descended from a kind of a cake made in Austria, in Vienna, in the early 1800s, which the name of those was Wiener Krupten, which was their stuffed donut. You know, that you had a jelly donut, right? Yeah, okay. Similar to that. I think that's a stretch, but you know, he's done some homework, so maybe he's not too far off. But anyway, but they got picked up. Let's look at it this way. Whoopie pies are sort of one baking company's answer to devil dogs. So you have a long, or maybe it's the other way around, I'm not really sure, but you know, you have a long skinny thing stuffed with white frosting, right? Whoopie pies, of course, are little round things stuffed with frosting. In any event, there's this whole rap about how, well, they were invented in Pennsylvania. No, they were not, but they were served at an event to which a lot of Amish people came in Pennsylvania. And they, being also sober people, became fond of whoopie pies, and they baked them and they put them in their children's lunch boxes, and the story says, and when the kids opened their lunch boxes, they said, whoopie! Now, I gotta tell you, I have a hard time imagining any little Amish kid saying, whoopie! But anyway, that's the story. But in fact, you know, whoopie pies are another one of these descendants of something else. So why were devil dogs called devil dogs? Anybody want to guess? Okay, let's just,
They put like hot dog buns?
pardon?
Well, devil, lots of things mean that are chocolate, are called devil, and they're
Just give
shaped,
her an A+ for her.
and they're shaped like hot dog buns.
Well, they are, so they're devil dogs, right. So let's look now back into the 19th century, the 1800s, and say, where's this whole devil angel thing come from? Anyway, because if you have devils, you also have to have angels.
Yeah.
And you have the angel food cake, of course, is the white one made with the white egg whites folded in that goes puff like this. So chocolate, there's a long and winding road to chocolate history, but in the earliest days, later 1600s, 1700s, early 1800s, chocolate was something you drank.
Right.
When I looked up for cake recipes, or I was looking for chocolate cake recipes, what I kept finding was recipes for cake to eat with chocolate. They didn't have chocolate in them, but they were meant to be eaten when you're drinking chocolate.
Wasn't there a king or somebody who decided that coffee and drinking chocolate were sinful and am I misremembering?
Oh, probably, but I wouldn't necessarily believe that. So, anyhow, so then gradually chocolate becomes a baking product. It takes a while before it's finally sold in a form that can be used in a home kitchen. So,
When is that, Sandy?
Dutch process.
middle of the 1800s or so, right? So then what we find is we get vanilla cakes with chocolate frosting, and those are called chocolate cakes. But it takes until the last part of the 1800s before we have chocolate as an ingredient in the cakes. And they were called devil's cakes, or devil's food cakes, as a contrast to the angel food cake, which was terribly popular at the time as well. And all of this has to do with cheap flour, cheap sugar, and egg beaters. But that's a whole other story. But just, you can imagine if you're going to make it a devil's, or if you're going to make an angel food cake, you need something to whip those whites into submission. And that's how that works. So angel food, devil food. So this all kind of morphs into whoopie pies. Now what happened? Basically whoopie pies were, as far as I can tell, whoopie pies were a commercial product that migrated into the kitchen, into domestic kitchens. They were a bakery product. They were a baking company product for a long time. How come people started making whoopie pies at home? Well, thank you, marshmallow fluff people. They said, you know, the stuff that's in those, that could be marshmallow fluff. They figured that out in their test kitchen. And so they put out recipes for whoopie pies filled with marshmallow fluff, which is actually an enormous improvement over Crisco with confectioned sugar beaten into it.
Yep.
When I moved to Maine and I learned about whoopie pies, I thought, okay, you know, I've got to have one because, you know, everybody's talking about them. On one bite, and I thought, oh no. And then a few years ago, it becomes the Maine's official snack.
Oh, no.
Whoopie pies are Maine's official snack. And this is all the fault of some guy at the University of Maine, I forget his name now, but he lobbied the legislature to do this, and he talked to me on the phone, and I said, oh no, please don't do this. You know, I said, there's so many other more dignified and truly delicious things that could be a Maine snack. You know, give these whoopie pies a break, for heaven's sakes. Nothing doing, and the legislature bit right on it, and we're now marked in the nation as having whoopie pies. Terrible. Does anybody actually like that filling?
Not the Crisco filling.
Aren't there a lot of different recipes?
Well, yeah, okay, so nowadays, let's see, when did this start? I would reckon about 20 years or so ago, we started getting a species of whoopie pie that was made with pumpkin cake or blueberry things or this and that and the other thing, and it was filled with buttercream. Well, now that's really delicious, but it's not a whoopie pie. You know, you can't go around making peanut butter jelly sandwiches using almond butter, say, and chutney and calling it a peanut butter jelly sandwich. It just isn't. It's an entirely different thing altogether. I reject that whole bun thought. Not that it's doing me. I'm not getting that, but you know, there we are. Yeah, they're really dreadful, but anyhow, but much beloved nonetheless. Mainers have periodically, of course, crashed into all kinds of hard times. And so it shouldn't be too surprising, given the 20th century, which was marked by one depression, 2 world wars, and rationing, that there had to be some workaround for coming up with a sweet for the family. And the result is something called eggless, butterless, milkless cake. And it does have flour in it, and other things to hold it all together. If you're curious, you can look the recipe up in the book. I think that's where you got the recipe, isn't it? What is in it anyway? I forgot. It was a long time ago.
Sugar, flour, lots of dried fruit.
Dried fruit, yeah. Sometimes, yeah, every once in a while I've come across an eggless, milkless, butterless cake that has, or as Christine says, the less cake.
It's a less cake. Less cake.
Sometimes it's made with applesauce. So that's another great way to glue it all together.
It's also an oil-based cake, so it lasts a long time.
Yeah, it stays nice and moist. It's a delicious cake.
Was that kind of cake a government recipe, you know, that was distributed because of rationing?
That's an interesting question. I don't know.
I think, because the government did like
Yeah, they
make home
did.
cooks ideas to.
I'll see if I can track that down. That's a good question, an interesting idea. Yeah, speaking of recipes coming from someplace else, you know, I talked a little bit about test kitchens, and test kitchens in the early 1900s are just very busy cranking out recipes for all kinds of things, especially as new ingredients come along. Bye.
Bon voyage!
He was going to
You okay?
So, for example, pineapples or dates or some of these exotic things that were coming into the market, you know, if you have never cooked with them before, you need to know what to do, right? So, test kitchens filled the purpose and found, you know, figured out things, ways of using them. And date nut bread was one of them, and Mainers really fell onto date nut bread. I'm amazed, every time we had a date nut bread recipe in the paper, somebody would write me in with all these wonderful memories associated with their date nut breads and how they take it to Thanksgiving, or they take it to Christmas, or it's always at the family reunion, or whatever it is. But date nut bread, in fact, I first heard about date nut bread in Maine from John Gardner, who worked at Mystic Seaport when I was a kid. And when I was first interested in recipes, this was a guy who wrote books about small craft. He was our famous boat builder, John was. But he came in the Buckingham House one day when I was cooking in the fireplace, and he said, "Well, you know, my sister," and we were launched on another date nut story, or date bread story. So I heard about this for a very long time. We're going to have date nut bread today from a Maine recipe, good old Maine recipe. Now, one of the things about test kitchens, of course, is that they're producing recipes that ask you to use their product. If it's dates, fine. If it's pineapple, fine. But lots of times, more ambitious test kitchens will tell you how to take their particular mix of something or another and put it in, you know, and you embellish it and you make this thing that you've never made before and all that. The problem with that is that as the economy changes, as people's tastes change, the recipes for those kinds of products are reformulated. Twinkies have been in existence for over 100 years. They've been reformulated 52 times.
Wow.
So when you have an old family recipe that says to use 2 cups of some pre-prepared ingredient, and you go ahead and use that, and it flops, you're going to say, "Oh no, this is not like Grandma made," and it isn't. And you're never ever going to make what Grandma made because that particular product has just been reformulated out of existence. This is the first time in human history that we have extinct recipes.
Wow.
We have extinct recipes. You'll never recreate them. You can recreate things from the Middle Ages. You can recreate things from the Renaissance. You can recreate Roman dishes because they have ingredients in them. They have actual food in them. And so you can make these dishes and have a taste, sort of what the past was like. But in the 20th century in America, and other places too, of course, this may not be possible. It's a really interesting thing. Never mind the shrinkage problem. You often notice the shrinkage problem. So you have a family recipe that says one can of something, and then, you know, it causes all kinds of problems because the same amount is no longer in that can. It's a really intriguing thing. So I work with old cookbooks and I think over, all right, now, the can size in 1953 was how many ounces? You know, you have to kind of work at reinventing a recipe in order to get close to what we used to have. I mean, I think this is a great sad shame, and I would just like to encourage you all to cook from scratch so that when your children get attached to your cooking, they too will be able to carry this recipe into the future with the least amount of angst
But you have to write down the recipe.
Yes,
The
yes.
way you actually make it, not the way it appears in the cookbook, because, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right, write them down, write them down. There's a friend of mine who will not pass her recipes on, she says, well, they're my recipes. And I don't, these are mine and I want these and, I'm thinking, when you're gone, sister, your family's gonna forget you because you're not gonna be able to make what Granny used to make. And that's your legacy is though, whatever it is, so you're cooked. I mean, that's really too, she's a wonderful cook too. I mean, that's really sad.
Sandy, can you talk a little bit about the effect of fluff on fudge?
Oh, God, yes, okay, marshmallows and fluff. Neither one of them are the same as they were. And that was because of good old corn syrup. So
Because
when
of
the
what?
marshmallow, corn
syrup.
syrup,
Oh, okay.
instead of using sugar, the marshmallow people all switched to corn syrup because corn syrup was really inexpensive. I first was tipped off to this when somebody wrote to me and said that their Rice Krispie treat recipe no longer worked. And it was because the marshmallows are different. And so the Rice Krispie treats don't bake up the same way as they always used to. It's really important when you're dealing with something like this to use the most recent recipe on the box so that your recipe will succeed. Because the test kitchens are keeping up with this stuff all the time. Marshmallows is one of the worst offenders in the corn syrup department and has caused more people Rice Krispie being. Can you imagine not ever being like Rice Krispie treats again? So that's the story on that. Yeah, but there's plenty of other things as well, and that's it. The corn syrup is the cause of that. Let's see. How are we doing for time?
Oh, you've only been talking for 35 minutes. You have a lot of time.
Should I slow down?
The rest of the things on your list are still there.
Well, okay. So we could talk about. Let me just take another
Can
look
we
at
talk about
this.
mincemeat?
Pardon?
Mincemeat, you mentioned mincemeat.
Yeah, I did mean. Yeah, okay. Let's talk about mincemeat. Ruthie and I share a love of real mincemeat.
Yes.
Yes. And if you're lucky, you have a hunter in your family or in your friendship circle, and could get some honest to God good venison. And the neck is great because there's a lot of bone in there, but you can cook it until all the meat falls off, and then you put it in the old family chopping bowl, add it in the suet, and the raisins, and the apples, and the brandy, and the cider, and spices, and stuff like that. And you put it away in a crock, and when you're ready to make a pie, you just scoop it out of the crock, put it inside a pie shell, bake it off, and say hallelujah. It's our traditional mincemeat is wonderful. And Maine is one of the places, and there's a few places in the Midwest as well where there's this sturdy hunting tradition where genuine venison mincemeat lives on. I have Edna Durkee's recipe for mincemeat, and it's 1 bowl of this and 2 bowls of that. But I gotta tell you that it doesn't matter. Pick a bowl and just stick with it.
Right.
It's because it'll be in proportion. And then everything else is to taste. So you don't have, they don't call for a bowl of cinnamon, but you'd add the cinnamon to taste. And you can just, my hygienist, when I went off to my Kelly up in Bangor, she said, oh yeah, my grandmother always made it. We have her recipe, it's a bowl of this and a bowl of that. And I thought, that's really intriguing. So we still have family recipes calling for bowls full of certain ingredients. But you don't let that throw you. Go ahead and use that recipe. Just pick a bowl and stick with it. And that becomes the old family mincemeat bowl.
And then when you have like 18 pies because your bowl was too big.
Just make one.
Give them to
keep the rest of it in the crock.
Keep it in the crock.
Yeah. Actually, mincemeat was in the old days a way of preserving scraps and bits and pieces of meat
Was it always a dessert or was it
No,
actually?
no, it wasn't, no. No, it's a sweet, well, we can maybe get into that. We can talk about the place of dessert in meals if you want, but, so mincemeat was really strongly connected with the Christmas celebration in old England. You could see when people started making mincemeat, it was a sign that Christmas was coming for sure. It's the end of the growing season. You know, you've done your butchering. You've got all this scrap beef to chop up and, you know, mix up into mincemeat to use to fill pies later on. And so the association of mincemeat and the celebration of Christmas struck the Puritans as a sure sign that someone was celebrating Christmas. And the earliest Puritan settlers in New England were not Christmas celebrators at all. However, they really went in big for Thanksgiving. So what happened is that the mincemeat slides over from Christmas and gets slapped up against the turkey for Thanksgiving. And dozens and dozens of little kids in the early 1900s, the late 1800s, remember being pressed into service. They would say, we knew that Thanksgiving was coming because my mother began making mincemeat. And the kids were given the job of taking the seeds out of the raisins. Let me just say a thing or two about seeds and raisins. A raisin with its seed still in it, it's like this. It's a big thing. It's a dried grape. Now we have bred grapes that have no seeds in them, and they're little, like this. So when you dry those, that's what you see in your cereal bowl in the morning, right? But you can take one of these other raisins and you pick the little grape seeds out of them. Little fingers are really good at that. And they're really, little kids, little fingers could pick a lot of seeds out of raisins, and so kids were often given that chore. And sometimes they were also allowed to do a lot of the pounding and the grinding for things like ginger and cinnamon and cloves and other seasonings that went into the mincemeat. So it was a family thing to make mincemeat at Thanksgiving time. And that's why, that's why nobody eats mincemeat at Thanksgiving anymore, because it doesn't have any meat in it, right? At this point, I think most mincemeat you find at the store might have had, a piece of hamburger dragged through it and saved for the next batch. It's just, they're practically a vegetarian food now. It's too bad.
But mincemeat, is there always a sweetener though in mincemeat?
Sure, sugar, brown sugar, yeah. And it has booze in it, which is a preservative.
Oh, right.
Yep. And it has cider, sweet cider dumped in. There's the suet all chopped up. Yeah, it's great stuff. It's great stuff. It is sweet. So, all right. I would say in the 19th century, you would always find mincemeat pie, together with pumpkin and apple pie, at a Thanksgiving meal. And you'd find it at the end of the meal. Up to the 1800s, however, the form of the meal was a little different than it is now. There were 2 courses. Very often there were mixed things on the table. You would have some sweet dishes, including things like mincemeat pie, or even a pumpkin pie, or a pudding, a steamed pudding of some sort, served alongside the roast and the soup, and little side dishes of vegetables and things. And then the second part of the meal would have more of the same, but usually things that were made of smaller stuff. The roasts were always in the first course, and the second course had little fricassees and this and that, and custards and stuff like that on the table. And people were accustomed to having, eating all of this stuff together. I'll tell you a funny story about doing a historic dinner over at Montpelier in Thomaston. When I did this meal, the people who were in charge of the museum at that time, really wanted people to have an experience of the 18th century, you know, and of the sort that Henry Knox would have offered his guests. So sure enough, I put all this stuff on the table all at one time, and people were looking at it like this. So they put it on their plate. But then it was like the Berlin Wall. All of the sweet stuff on one side, and then they ate all of the savory stuff, and then they ate the sweet stuff. And then when I did the second course, it was the same thing. You know, separate the food out. It's so ingrained in our
That's what
eating
your mother
habit.
told you.
Yeah, that's right.
No pudding until you eat.
Yeah, it's just, it's fun when you can kind of get into an 18th century mindset and go ahead and, you know, have something sweet next to your roast beef, you know, woo! But anyway, so the dessert migrates to the end of the meal in the 1800s, and it becomes its own course. Usually not several desserts, not several sweet things, but rather one thing brought to the table that everybody would have. This was associated with a party. There were parties where all desserts were served, and coffee and tea, as well as probably sherry and all that other kind of stuff as well. And in fact, the Nutcracker Suite is about such a party. If you read the story, you'll see all the ingredients that you needed for making various desserts: orange water, rose water, there's sugar, the dance of the sugar plum fairy. The sugar plum fairy, and
there's coffee and tea.
And there's coffee, tea, and a lot of the dances reveal that. So that the Nutcracker Suite is a really charming story about a late 18th century Christmas party featuring desserts. It's really interesting. Well, I think it's interesting. Yeah.
Or just Pepsi.
Or just Pepsi. Yeah. You know, sometime it'd be really fun to talk about this Pepsi. It really would. I mean, it's really rocketed through dyspepsia and all of the other digestive discussions that people have had over time are fascinating, and we're still living with the what do you call it? So that. Does anybody want to talk about Needhams?
Yes.
Okay. Well, how many people have had a Needham? Oh, well, all right. So you know, it's got potato and coconut, sugar, and it's covered with chocolate, right?
Oh, my.
Yep. Okay. Now I have Rebecca's cookbook. Do you all know who the Rebeccas are? They are the female branch, I think, of the Oddfellows. And they have been producing cookbooks in Maine for a very long time, all the way back to the 30s. And I have a whole bunch of different era cookbooks, including one that has the most amusing recipe in it for Arabian pork chops. Really laugh. Isn't that funny? A lot of Arabians don't eat pork. So who knows what that is? Is that a little slam or what? Or is it just a confusion? I have no idea. But anyway, some of my Rebecca's cookbooks have a recipe in them for something called a potato candy, and it's a Needham. So here's another one of these whoopie pie, migration from commerce to domestic, or domestic to commerce, and I don't know which way it went. But just cook up a bunch of mashed potatoes, beat in a bunch of sugar, put in the coconut. Have any of you ever grated a coconut fresh and used it in your baking? Oh, do it once in your life. It's really wonderful. I have a great coconut cake recipe, which ends up being moist and unbelievably succulent and delicious. It's just treat yourself once in your life. So in the 19th century, when people met up with coconut, actually confectioners' shops in cities like Portland, or probably even a small city like Belfast, would have had a confectioner shop. And one of the things they offered their customers was to grate their coconut for them, because it wasn't,
It's a job.
it's a job. Yeah, and your knuckles will never be the same. Yeah. So it was wonderful. People could go get a coconut, have it grated up, take it home, and then cook with a super, super fresh coconut, unsweetened. I have rinsed coconut off, but I had to buy it with sugar on it so that I could get away from extra sweet stuff. And if you can always kind of freshen up coconut by just stirring a little cream in it, just go like this, and toss it, and it'll bring the coconut back to life again. It's really very good that way. But anyway, so the coconut goes into the potatoes, and then you dip it in melted chocolate. Now, Marjorie Standish, who used to write for the Maine Sunday Telegram recipes, she did it for 20 years, has a Needham recipe, and she calls for melting a little paraffin in with the chocolate, which does help. It firms right up. I just can't quite to do that. Oh. Instead, I make a ganache and I paint it on. I don't want to eat paraffin. So why are they called Needhams? I don't know. Maybe they're called Needhams for the same reason that the Unita biscuit was invented, or developed as a product. You need them. Right? And somebody surmised that this was a confectioner in Portland who developed this as a product, and now you can find them in Rennie's, right by the cash register. They were there the day before yesterday. But they're also pretty easy to make. Does anybody make their own homemade noodles?
I tried once, it was a failure. With a big mess.
Yeah, just don't try to dip them.
Yeah,
Because
that
they'll
was
fall
my
apart.
mistake.
Yeah, then you get sort of a,
You get potatoes
Mush.
floating in your chocolate.
yeah, you get Needham hash instead of
It's awful, I threw the whole
It
thing
tastes
away.
good, you just have to close your eyes really good. But it's a mess. They
So
fall
you should
apart.
paint it on, is that the trick?
I paint it on with ganache.
Okay.
And then if I want more chocolate on, I take them out of the pan and then I kind of go like this and paint the ganache on the sides. It's a big pain in the neck. I did it once for Chad with somebody or another, 75 in Portland. I worked quickly, just tried to live to see what was going on. They really liked the idea of having this as a featured recipe. Okay, let's see. Well, I got to the bottom of my list. We could either eat dessert now, or you could ask questions. What would you want to vote? Any questions? Any questions about some favorite family dessert?
I was wondering about maple syrup
Maple syrup.
in desserts.
Right.
Why that wasn't, you talked about how much molasses there was. Was maple syrup used, or was that?
Not much.
Not much at all. No, you'll find recipes for things like maple syrup pie. Oh, I can talk about vinegar pie.
Ooh, that's a depression recipe, isn't it?
Ooh.
Isn't that a depression recipe? Vinegar pie?
Well, maybe or maybe not. No, I don't think so. 'Cause
Okay.
I've seen them earlier than that. When you think about how much some people really like pie, and how much they're likely to want to have pie at any time of the year, but you get around towards, April and May. There's just nothing except maybe rhubarb to start making pies with. But you could make a pie using vinegar, and the vinegar pie is in the sugar pie family. The sugar pie family includes black bottom pies, chess pies, lemon meringue pies. They're all made with a flavored sugar syrup and with eggs mixed in as well, sometimes cornstarch. Pecan pie is a sugar pie. There's a whole bunch of these that don't have fruit. They don't have, they're not a pie like that. But you can make them any time of year, and you can make them as long as you've got sugar in the house and some eggs, and a pie crust. You could just put them all together. Vinegar pie is in this category of stuff. It comes out tasting just like lemon meringue pie, actually. It's just tart enough, but it always sounds like a prank. You know? It always sounds like you're trying to slide something over on somebody and give them a vinegar pie. But it's just a nice substitute for lemon. Yeah.
I have a friend who told me about an old family recipe that was made out of Ritz crackers and it tastes just like an apple pie.
Yes.
Is that a depression?
Yeah.
I don't believe it. I'm not.
Oh, it's true. My mom did it. It's a joke.
Yeah. And they do. And the Ritz cracker pie is descended from an earlier soda cracker pie that people made in the 1800s before Ritz crackers were invented. And you know, the plain fact of the matter is that you can convince someone that they're eating an apple pie just by taking something bland and putting sugar in it and all the apple cinnamon and nutmeg and maybe a little clove or something. They'll say, oh, yum, yum, this is, you know, it's like pumpkin spice, you know?
Yeah.
We could think, we think we're eating something that's got pumpkin in it if it has this pumpkin spice mixes in it. Yeah. That's another get around the shortage dodge is this cracker pie. They're really common. Yeah, it's fun. Good thing to do on April 1.
That's when she
You know?
did it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's gonna be fun. Here you go, have an apple pie. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, come on, no questions? I'm gonna go home.
You just want dessert.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
That's a question.
Which of the things we're gonna taste are your favorite?
ooh.
Actually,
And how
none
did
of
you
them. No, this is here not because I like them, but because they're illustrative. I picked these so that you could have a taste of some of what we've been talking about this afternoon. I like a really good, dark, rich chocolate cake. I just think that's cat's meat. And I have a wonderful recipe that uses zucchini and two different forms of chocolate, both melted chocolate and powdered chocolate. And it has two kinds of shortening. It has oil and butter. And it has, oh, it's just really wonderful. And you can use a lot of zucchini in it too. And that recipe, if you could pardon the lack of humility, is in this recipe book.
It's in the cookbook.
It's in a wonderful recipe. If you don't want to buy the book, I'll give you the recipe. This is so good. And that's my favorite.
How about steamed puddings?
Yeah.
We can't make them because they don't make coffee cans out of metal anymore.
No, I know, it's awful, isn't it?
It's
Yeah, the next time you go to a yard sale or an antique store, look for an old-fashioned lard bucket. You can, however, buy steaming molds that have a tube up the middle, and when you turn it out, it's a pretty shape. A lot of people don't want to make steamed puddings anymore because they don't want to have something bubbling away on top of the stove. Now, if you're smart and you have a wood cook stove, or you have a wood stove, would keep a good high temperature, you can cook it on top of the stove. You can also steam them in an oven by just putting the canister into hot water in the oven and letting it rip for 3 hours at a lowish temperature, so you can do that. But the steam puddings are kind of it's sort of a way of making cake without baking it. It's a steamed cake, really. Almost all steamed puddings have that in them, but think about how, again, this is there's sort of an evolution through cooking, starting with the very simplest mixture of a liquid and a grain as a porridge. And you can make it taste a little better by putting some dried fruit in it. And then you can make it better if you add some shortening. And it's, maybe you're going to use flour. And then you think about putting some spice in it. And then, an egg makes it richer, and so on. And pretty soon you've got cake. You've gone from porridge to cake by just enhancing that basic mixture. So once you get to the enhanced end of things, you can could steam it or you could bake it. And that's how that breaks out. Those puddings, steamed puddings, are sliceable, just like cakes are. And you can have, they can have fruit in them, you can make a pumpkin steamed pudding. What else could you could make? A chocolate steamed pudding?
Chocolate steamed pudding and hard sauce.
Yeah.
The hard isn't hard, it melts.
I know. Yeah, it's called hard because it's stiff, not because it has booze in it. It has booze in it, but it's because that particular sauce doesn't pour. You have to melt it on things. A plum pudding at Christmas time is a grand thing, and that's sort of like that's like you take mincemeat and you dump a whole lot of flour into it, and add an egg or two, and then you steam it, and that gives you that's a plum pudding. That's a wonderful dessert too with hard sauce. I like figgy pudding myself. No, did we ever get to, maple syrup. I wanted one more thing to say about maple syrup. Sure. In the earliest days when people came to this country, and they didn't have ready access to white sugar, one of the things that was being produced, especially in frontier areas, or the very edge of settlement, people were sugaring. They tapped trees and they boiled it down. And the purpose was not to get the syrup, but to get to sugar, so that you could put sugar into your tea or your coffee, or even use it in your cooking. So the goal was always sugar. It was not maple syrup. We don't get all that keen about syrup until the later 1800s, early 1900s, when we have cheap sugar. We don't have to have maple sugar anymore. So that's a kind of a shift. Now, I don't know, there's a couple of wonderful things you can do with maple sugar. If you can get just a nice fresh piece of maple sugar, grate it, take a plate, flood it with cream, put a piece of nice bland white bread on it, like Pepperidge Farm, right? And then put your shaved maple sugar on top of that, and put cream on top of that. It's really, really good. It's a French-Canadian thing, and it's just, will knock your socks off. It's great stuff. And we'll I guess we have to give them dessert, huh?
I have to give them dessert.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're not asking questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you ever have to bake for those people that are gluten-free and vegan and dairy-free? Because I have lots of family members with so many dietary restrictions.
I know about that.
Yeah?
Have I ever what?
I don't know, what flour would you use if you're doing gluten-free or...
No, they don't get dessert.
I'm with you.
I don't mean to be unsympathetic, but
It's a pain.
Flourless chocolate cakes.
King Arthur makes a wonderful substitute flour. It's a one-for-one flour. You can use their mix in every recipe that calls for flour, and you'll get something that actually works, which is really good. I mean, it's really frustrating sometimes. Most of us don't have on hand things like, tapioca flour and, all the other odd things that you're supposed to put together. Unless you've got a celiac in your family or somebody who has a terrible problem with IBS or something like that, then you have to gear up on that stuff and provide for them. But I'll tell you, in the summertime I get woofers. This is the Worldwide Opportunities in Organic Farming Volunteer Program, and I'm a WOOF host. And people apply to come to my house, and I get to work in my garden for half a day, and then I go to the beach if they want to. And every once in a while, I'll get somebody who hasn't been frank with me. I had one year, somebody applied, and I said, well, tell me about your dietary habits. And she said, well, I don't eat beef and pork. So she shows up, and I find out she doesn't eat beef, pork, chicken, eggs, cheese, milk. And she's a gluten avoider as well. I thought, I just didn't know what to, here, have a carrot. It was just, really hard. It was really hard. And I said, are you a celiac? And she said, oh, no, but I don't. So I just I don't mean, I'm sorry to be so stinking about this, but, you know what's gonna happen is, another 5 years, I won't be able to give you that either. You know, I mean, something will go kerfooey in my system. I'll have to eat all my words along with It's just, it's really tough. Our culture is built on wheat, and meat, wheat and beef, and these are challenging times for how to live responsibly and comfortably, given our cultural heritage. With these new food avoidances that we do both for the sake of the world and for our own health. It's it's interesting, it's all get out, but it's tough. It can be really tough, especially with growing almond flour.
Both our
Oh, really?
stores
Of course, that's the
sell
one I
that
bought.
King 1-and-1, 1-to-1. Both
Yes.
stores here sell that kind of,
Oh, wow, I don't know.
they do.
Yeah.
But just look, oh, they do.
Yeah,
They do.
it's
Oh,
on the
good.
shelf. It's small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the big bags.
No, the big, no.
But it's really, it really
It's
works.
available, both of them have done a great job
Yeah, they really have.
providing.
Yeah, it's good, yeah. It's an easy way out, and thank goodness they're doing it, because,
Right.
yeah, that's good.
Other
Okay,
questions for Sandy? I would introduce you to what's on the table,
Yeah.
okay? The less cake, but I couldn't stand it, and I put frosting on it that has butter in it. So that's the less cake. The cookies here are the crybaby cookies, all right? This is a date nut bread, okay? And the hot water chocolate cake. They're small pieces, don't eat it all. But please consume what's on the table, because otherwise we'll have to take it home and eat it ourselves.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that.